New Mexico Territory, 1889. Mara Ellis hit the dirt behind the Silver Spur Saloon. Breath ripped from her lungs as Colton Briggs slammed her against the wall and pressed a hand over her mouth to keep her from screaming. His whiskey-soaked breath curled around her ear as he snarled that no one in Redwater Crossing would care if she vanished tonight. Mara clawed at his wrist, vision blurring, her unborn child twisting beneath her ribs as terror locked her body in place. Bootsteps pounded the alley, fast, heavy, Colton jerking his head just long enough for her to gasp a single thought that shattered through the panic. If I disappear here, no one will ever speak Jonah's name again. A shadow filled the alley mouth, broad-shouldered and silent, and Colton's grip finally faltered. Before we continue, if you're watching this from anywhere in the world, leave your city name in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Mara Ellis sat at the small kitchen table like a woman borrowing someone else's life. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her cheek swollen purple where Colton Briggs's ring had kissed bone. The smell of beans and coffee wrapped around her, too warm, too gentle for a body that still braced for the next hit. Josiah King set a tin plate down in front of her. "Eat," he said. His voice was low, worn at the edges. "You're shaken hard enough to rattle the spoons." Her fingers closed around the fork anyway. She tried to move slow, careful, like if she didn't show hunger they might not notice how empty she was. First bite. Her hands trembled so bad, the beans slid back into the plate. Across from her, Isaiah scraped his chair in closer. The legs screeched on the floorboards. Mara flinched so hard her fork clattered, metal ringing like a shot. Her whole body jerked away from the sound before she could stop it. For one wild beat, she waited for someone to shout, to grab, to drag her back out into the dark. Nobody did. Isaiah froze, eyes wide. "Sorry," he muttered. 17, maybe 18, all elbows and stubborn jaw. "I didn't mean—" "I know," she whispered, but her voice barely made it past her teeth. Josiah pulled out the third chair and sat at the short end of the table, so he could see them both. He didn't look straight at Mara's bruises. His gaze hovered just off her face, like he was scared if he counted every mark he'd see things he'd spent years trying to bury. "No one raises a hand in this house," he said quietly. "Not to a woman, not to a child, not while I'm still breathing." He wasn't looking at Isaiah when he said it. Isaiah bristled anyway. "I know that, Uncle." "Then I'm reminding her," Josiah replied, nodding toward Mara. "Not you." Mara swallowed around a lump that had nothing to do with beans. Men had promised things before. Sober, drunk, half kind, half cruel. None of them had ever felt like this. Simple, heavy, spoken, like a rule carved into wood. Her eyes flicked to the door. It was only a few steps away. If she ran now, if she slipped out into the night while they were still talking, maybe she could. And go where? Back to town, where every man at that saloon had seen her on her knees? Back to the room Colton kept for debts? Onto the road, with no horse, no money, and a baby that already pulled at the muscles in her back. Her hand moved again. Another bite. Her stomach cramped from the rush of food, but she kept going. Weak as she was, hunger still scared her less than the road. Isaiah picked at his bread, watching her like she was a fire someone had dropped on their table. Dangerous, but hard to look away from. "We can't keep doing this," he blurted finally. "Bringing folks home every time town turns ugly. We ain't got hay as it is. Bank's already sniffing around the fence line." "Isaiah," Josiah's tone sharpened just enough to cut. "Well, it's true," the boy said, but softer now. "You always say we're hanging on by the teeth of it. And now there's another mouth." Mara's grip tightened on the fork. Another mouth. Another burden. She had heard worse. She had been called worse. But somehow, here in this small kitchen with the lamplight catching the tired lines beside Josiah King's eyes, those words cut deeper than she expected. She set the fork down very carefully. "If you want me gone by morning," she said, staring at the table, "say it plain. I won't break your plates over it." Silence stretched. The clock on the shelf ticked too loud. Isaiah looked from her to Josiah, guilt flickering across his face like a shadow of the boy he still was. Josiah leaned back, crossed his arms, and took a slow breath. He looked at Mara like a man measuring a fence post that had already been through 3 storms and was somehow still standing. "You're not furniture," he said. "I don't get to move you in and out when bills come due." Her laugh came out broken. "Feels like that's all I've been for a long time." He hesitated, then added, "And another thing. What they called you back at the Silver Spur, that stays there. No one uses those names under my roof. You're Mrs. Ellis here till you tell us otherwise." Mrs. Ellis. The name landed heavy in her chest. It carried graves and vows, and a pair of hands she'd buried in the red dirt outside another town. It carried the man she'd lost, and the child she still had to bring into a world that had never once asked what she wanted. But it was still a name. Her name. Not the ones the drunks had spat between teeth stained with whiskey. "Why?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Josiah looked down at his plate, then back at her. For a heartbeat, something raw flickered through his gaze. Old pain, old ghosts. "I know what it is," he said slowly. "To need a door that opens instead of closes. That's enough for tonight." He pushed his own plate away, barely touched. "Eat what you can. Bed's made up in the storeroom. We'll figure the rest when the sun's up." Mara stared at the beans cooling in front of her. Leave and the dark would take her. Stay, and she might drown these people in the trouble that followed her like a shadow. Her hand moved on its own again, lifting the fork. Another bite. Another small act of defiance against every man who'd ever tried to starve her into obedience. For the first time in a long time, she let herself think one forbidden thought. Maybe I don't have to run tonight. Outside, the wind pushed against the walls of Evening Star Ranch. Inside, 3 strangers sat at one table, none of them ready to call it family yet. All of them closer to it than they knew. The ranch had settled into the kind of silence that made every thought louder. Mara Ellis lay on the narrow cot in the storeroom, staring up at the rafters. Her ribs throbbed every time she breathed too deep. Her wrists, still raw from the ropes the Briggs boys had used, burned each time the blanket brushed them. She tried to bury her shaking under the straw-stuffed mattress, but her body refused to forget the hands that had dragged her, the voices that had laughed. Sleep wouldn't come. Somewhere outside the door, she heard Isaiah's voice, low and sharp like a knife scraping flint. "We can't keep her, Uncle Josiah. You know we can't." Josiah answered more quietly, but the walls were thin. "She's hurt." "So are we," Isaiah whispered fiercely. "The bank's circling. Colton's looking for trouble. You bring her here, and ranch trouble becomes town trouble, then becomes king trouble." Mara shut her eyes. The words weren't meant to wound her, but they did anyway. She curled on her side, instinctively protecting her belly with both hands. Josiah sighed, the sound heavy as boot steps in wet dirt. "Isaiah, go sleep. We'll talk more in the morning." "Talk about what?" Isaiah snapped. "If she's staying?" Josiah didn't answer. Footsteps retreated, and the house fell quiet again. Mara pulled the thin blanket to her chin, swallowing the shame that rose like bile. She'd heard men argue over her before, but never like this. Never men who had tried to be gentle. The door eased open. Light from the lantern in Josiah's hand cut a soft stripe across the room. He didn't step inside at first, just stood in the doorway like a man asking permission without saying the words. "You awake?" he asked. "I haven't slept in a while," she admitted. He nodded, came in, and set the lantern on a barrel. In his other hand was an extra blanket, worn but clean. "Night's colder than usual." She pushed herself up on an elbow. A stabbing pain traveled down her side, and she sucked in a breath. Josiah's eyes narrowed. "Those ribs ain't just bruised." "I've had worse," she murmured. "That ain't a comfort." He hesitated, then lowered himself to sit on the overturned crate beside her cot. Close enough to talk, not close enough to scare. "You were holding your stomach earlier," he said quietly. "You hurt there too?" She froze. Her fingers gripped the blanket so tight her knuckles went white. She had hidden the truth for days, afraid if someone knew she was carrying a child, they'd either sell her faster or take the baby from her before she ever saw its face. But lying had never saved her. Truth hadn't either. But tonight, she was too tired to choose the safer sin. Her voice cracked. I'm expecting." Josiah didn't move for a long breath. Not shock, something deeper, older. The lantern light caught the sorrow in his eyes before he blinked it away. "Chong Toy, Jonah Ellis," she added in a whisper. "He died last winter. I've been on my own since. Folks say a woman alone on the road ain't worth more than what she can be traded for." She swallowed hard. "I can't let that happen. Not to my child." The blanket in Josiah's hands rustled as he tightened his grip on it. He looked away just for a moment, like someone reopening a wound with bare fingers. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher than she'd heard it before. "You should have told me. I was scared you'd send me out," she said softly. "Most men do." "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "I ain't most." He set the blanket over her legs with a gentleness that stunned her. "You and that little one ain't going anywhere tonight," he said. "And tomorrow, we'll figure it out. Together." The word hung there, foreign and warm and terrifying. Together. She held it in her chest like an ember cupped in two hands. Josiah rose, picked up the lantern, and paused at the door. "Get some rest, Mrs. Ellis." When he closed it behind him, Mara finally let the tears fall, quiet, shaking, but not from fear. For the first time in months, she wasn't crying because she was alone. She was crying because maybe, just maybe, she wasn't anymore. Redwater Crossing woke slow, like a town rubbing sleep out of its eyes. The air still smelled of last night's whiskey and dust. Mara Ellis sat stiffly in Josiah King's wagon as the wheels rolled over the uneven street. She kept her chin tucked low, bonnet pulled tight, hoping no one would notice the bruises that bloomed like storm clouds down her jaw. Isaiah held the reins, shoulders tight. He'd been quiet since dawn, but not the peaceful kind. More the kind of silence that came from swallowing arguments whole. Mara's spine curled, instinctive, the same way a stray dog bends when the stick gets raised. Josiah noticed. He sat beside her, arms loose on his knees, voice low. "Sit up straight," he murmured. "You're not walking into a gallows." Her breath snagged. "People stare." "They stare anyway," he said. "Might as well give 'em something decent to stare at." Isaiah snorted. "Town stares at us all the time. Ain't new." "But the names they call me are," Mara whispered. Josiah didn't hesitate. "Those names stay in the saloon. Anyone tries saying 'em out here, they'll have words with me." The wagon jolted over a rut. Mara forced herself a little straighter. Not proud, not confident. Just unwilling to shrink again. Her ribs complained. Her stomach tightened. But she stayed upright. It felt like lifting a mountain. Mrs. Alder's General Mercantile sat at the end of Main Street, its windows lined with biscuits, soap, and bolts of cloth faded under the sun. The bell over the door chimed when they stepped in. The older woman behind the counter looked up and froze. Her eyes flicked to Mara's face, the bruise along her cheekbone, the split lip. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. "Oh, honey," Mrs. Alder whispered under her breath, soft enough only Mara and the dust between them heard. "Someone did a number on you." Mara's throat tightened. She stared at her boots. Josiah cleared his throat. "We need arnica oil, clean cloth, thread, maybe some tonic, and a dress. Something she can move in." Mrs. Alder nodded with brisk, quiet efficiency, the kind belonging to women who had seen more broken bones and broken hearts than men ever will. "You sit right there, darling," she said to Mara. "I'll fetch the sizes closest to yours." Mara sat. Lantern light spilled across the floorboards, and for a moment she imagined she was still the version of herself Jonah knew, clean, steady, capable of laughter. That life felt too far now, like watching another woman from a window she couldn't open. Mrs. Alder returned with 3 dresses. "Try 'em in the back," she said, but her gaze softened again. "You're safe, sweetheart. Ain't no one gonna bother you here." Safe. That word hit her like a warm cloth pressed to a fever. She slipped into the back room, fingers trembling as she pulled the first dress over her bruised ribs. Cotton whispered across her skin. Clean, soft, unfamiliar. When she stepped before the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Still battered, still haunted, but not ruined. And for some reason, that scared her more than the bruises ever had. She smoothed the fabric over her belly, barely rounding but carrying weight all the same. She didn't hide it, didn't cover it with her hands, didn't turn sideways to make it smaller, just breathed and let herself exist. When she stepped out, Josiah looked up first. His eyes widened, not with surprise but with something quieter, something like respect. "Looks right," he said simply. Isaiah nodded stiffly, but there was a small, guilty admiration in his young face. "Better than the old one," he muttered. Mara touched the fabric lightly. "I've never had something this good." Mrs. Alder clicked her tongue. "This ain't even the good stuff, sweetheart. But it'll do." She bagged the rest of the items, then leaned close to Josiah, lowering her voice. "Word is, Briggs Bank's been sniffing around your ranch note." Josiah's jaw tensed. "I know. You bringing this girl home won't make that easier," the older woman warned gently. "People talk, and in a town like this, talk spreads like prairie fire." "Let 'em talk," Josiah said. Mrs. Alder sighed, then slipped 2 wrapped biscuits into the bag Mara held. "For the road," she said, "and for the baby." Mara blinked. "How'd you know?" "Honey," Mrs. Alder smiled sadly, "I've birthed 9 kids in this town and buried 3. Belly knows belly." Mara swayed, overwhelmed. No one had touched her with kindness in months. No one had offered anything without a price, without expecting something she didn't want to give. She whispered, "Thank you." Mrs. Alder reached out, cupping Mara's cheek lightly, not touching the bruise, just the space beside it. "You mind your head around town here. Redwater's got 2 kinds of folks, the ones who'll help, and the ones who'll hurt you twice if they smell fear." That truth settled sharp in Mara's ribs, and she realized something else too. She didn't want to bow her head forever, not with a child on the way, not with men like Colton Briggs walking free, not with a ranch offering her a bed and a meal without demanding her name in return. She stepped outside the shop with her shoulders a grain higher, not proud, just trying. Isaiah loaded the supplies into the wagon with quick hands. "You feeling all right?" Mara hesitated, then nodded. "I'm tired, but I'm all right." Josiah watched her climb into the wagon. He didn't offer to help, not out of coldness, but because he read her face and knew she wanted to do it herself. When she settled, he said quietly, town didn't look at you half as hard as you thought. It looked enough, she murmured. He gave a faint nod. Next time will be easier. Next time? She asked. That's how healing works, he said. One step, then another. Mara looked down at the biscuit Mrs. Alder had slipped into her hand. The paper was warm from her palm. Maybe he was right. Maybe healing wasn't a destination, just a road you walked with people willing to match your pace. As the wagon turned toward Evening Star Ranch, sunlight brushed the town's roofs in soft gold. Mara didn't dare call it hope. Not yet. But she didn't bow her head either. For the first time in a long road of bruises and fear, she let herself look forward. Sheriff Duffy's office sat just off the main street, a squat wooden building with a sagging roof and a flag that hadn't seen a fresh wind in months. Josiah King tied the wagon out front, jaw set tight, while Mara Ellis held the edge of her seat, pulse ticking fast under her bruises. This won't take long, Josiah said. But the words felt uncertain even to him. Isaiah hopped down first, casting a hard glance around town like he expected Colton Briggs to jump from behind every barrel. We shouldn't be here long at all, he muttered. Mara drew her shawl up, instinctively trying to fade into the boards. The wagon ride back from Mrs. Alder's had steadied her a little. The new dress, the quiet kindness. But the moment Josiah said sheriff, all that steadiness trembled. Lawmen had never been her salvation. They'd watched men drag her by the hair, watched her be shoved into rooms she didn't want to enter, watched and shrugged. The door creaked open. Sheriff Duffy looked up from his desk, boots propped, hat dipping low over watery eyes. His mustache twitched when he saw them. Well, he drawled, if it ain't the King family and company. Josiah's tone stayed even. Need to make a report. A report? Duffy scoffed, lowering his boots. Ain't even noon and you're bringing me trouble? Colton Briggs laid hands on her, Josiah said, in the Silver Spur, pulled her out back. She was bruised when I found her. Duffy didn't even look at Mara. He looked at Josiah, and worse, he smirked. Colton was drunk, the sheriff said. Boys say things when they drink. Ain't nothing worth stirring the pot. Isaiah stiffened. He grabbed her. Duffy shrugged. Some men misunderstand each other's interest. Happens. Mara's breath hitched. Josiah stepped slightly in front of her, voice lowering. That ain't a misunderstanding. That's assault. Now Duffy did look at her, but only the way a man looks at a muddy saddle. Miss, you were staying at the Spur, weren't you? No, Mara whispered. She wasn't staying anywhere, Josiah cut in. She was running. There's a difference. Duffy tapped the desk with 2 fat fingers. Still seems more like a personal matter. Briggs boys got temper. Happens. There were witnesses, Josiah said. You could ask. Duffy lifted a hand. I ain't dragging Briggs into my office over a drunk spat. That family keeps this town running. Cattle, bank, taxes. We respect that. You should too. Mara felt the pressure building in her chest. The old crushing truth that her pain weighed less than a rich man's inconvenience. But then something strange happened. Josiah stepped forward, letting the full gravity of his height fill the room. "I ain't here to beg for justice," he said. "I'm here to tell you what happened. If you choose to do nothing, that's on you." Swallowed, but didn't break. His gaze slid past Josiah, toward the wall. Mara followed his eyes, then froze. Hanging there, framed in dust and pride, was a medal. The lettering glinted in the dim light. Bear Creek, Private Jonah Ellis. Her breath deserted her, her late husband's name, on a wall, in a town he'd never lived in the office of a sheriff who wouldn't look at her bruises. Duffy puffed his chest a little. "Fine boy, that Ellis. Hero, some say. Took a bullet saving one of his own." Something cracked in Mara's voice. He died there." "Oh." The sheriff shrugged. "Them ambushes go fast. Real fast. Hard to say who saved who. But that boy, Ellis, took a round to the chest. Shame. Could have been one of our finest." Mara's eyes burned. Jonah had never told her details, only wrote that he was cold, hungry, scared of dying nameless. Knowing strangers spoke of him like he was just another ghost in a story, hurt more than any bruise on her body. Josiah didn't move for a long, long moment. Then Mara noticed something she had never seen before. He was pale. Not from anger. From memory. His eyes locked on the metal like it was a snake in the room. His hands tightened at his sides, slow, steady, like a man bracing himself against a storm only he could hear. "Bear Creek," Duffy went on, "was a real mess. Men burned alive in barns, horses run off cliffs, smoke so thick you couldn't see your own damn boots." He chuckled like it was a campfire tale. "But stories need heroes. Ellis got that honor." Mara clutched her stomach. Jonah, her Jonah, reduced to a tale, a name, a shield for a sheriff's pride. Josiah suddenly turned away from the metal, voice quiet, forced steady. "We're done here." Duffy waved a hand. "Suit yourself." Isaiah opened the door. Mara followed, but not before casting one last look at Jonah's name on the wall, hanging there like a gravestone carved by men who didn't know him at all. Outside, the sunlight felt harsher. Isaiah muttered, "Sheriff's scared of Briggs. He ain't gonna help." Josiah didn't answer. His silence wasn't the usual kind. Wasn't the calm, heavy quiet he carried like a coat. This silence vibrated, sharp, haunted. Mara touched the wagon's side for balance. Jonah saved someone?" Josiah lifted the reins but didn't look at her. His jaw flexed, muscles tight enough to crack bone. "I don't know," he said, but his voice wavered, like a man holding a truth so heavy it threatened to tear him down the middle. As the wagon rolled away from the sheriff's office, Mara sat perfectly still, clutching the new dress across her knees, the town shrinking behind her. Hope from Mrs. Alder's kindness still lingered, but now it shared space with a new feeling, sharper, colder, pressure. She didn't know whose story was being told on that wall. She only knew it wasn't the whole one. And Josiah King looked like a man who'd heard enough to shake him straight to the bone. The trail out of Redwater Crossing dipped between two low ridges, narrow enough that wagon wheels scraped dust straight into the air. Mara Ellis held the sideboard with one hand, her breath tight in her ribs. She could still feel Jonah's name burning behind her eyes, etched on that sheriff's wall like it belonged to men who didn't even know him. Josiah King sat rigid on the driver's seat, shoulders stone still beneath his worn coat. Isaiah rode horseback alongside, scanning the ridge with nervous energy. Mara sensed something was wrong before the ambush even showed itself. The air went too still, the birds too quiet. The wagon seemed to creak louder than normal. "Josiah," she whispered. He didn't answer. He'd already seen them. 4 riders appeared ahead, silhouettes against the narrowing sky. One of them tipped his hat with a lazy taunt. Colton Briggs. Her stomach dropped like she'd been shoved off a ledge. "Well now," Colton called, voice soaked in whiskey and spite. "If it ain't King and his little charity wagon." Isaiah stiffened in his saddle. "We should turn around." "No," Josiah said quietly. "Stay calm. Keep your hand off the trigger." Colton urged his horse closer until he blocked the wagon's path. Beside him, 2 young men, barely more than boys, grinned wide, drunk on arrogance and liquor. "Word in town," Colton slurred, "is you're hiding trouble in that wagon. Trouble with big eyes and bruises." Josiah didn't rise to the bait. "We're heading home. Move aside." Colton leaned in the saddle, the mockery stretching slow across his mouth. "Funny thing, King. Folks say you're getting bold again. Dragging strays home. Pretending you ain't the man you used to be." His eyes flicked to Mara. "And her? She a stray? Or just something you want to keep warm in that ranch of yours?" Mara pressed her back against the wagon seat, wishing she could disappear into the boards. Her bruises pulsed with memory, hands grabbing, voices laughing, the dark behind the saloon. One of the boys nudged his horse closer. "She looks soft," he said. "Bet she'd fetch a price." Isaiah jerked forward. "Say that again," Josiah barked. "Isaiah, hold." The boy froze, breath shaking. Colton widened his grin. "Hear that? The great Midnight King giving orders. Lord, it's like the old days, ain't it? Except back then you didn't mind getting your hands dirty." Josiah stared dead ahead. "You got 3 seconds to step aside." "Or what?" Colton sneered. "You'll shoot? That's rich. A black rancher pulling a gun on white boys looking for a little fun?" His voice rose so all could hear. "Town'd hang you before sunset." Mara saw Josiah's hand twitch near his pistol, but just once. Then it steadied. His breathing stayed slow, controlled. He was fighting himself harder than he was fighting Colton. One of the riders grew impatient. "Hell, let's just see her." Before Josiah could act, the boy reached over the wagon's edge, snatching Mara's wrist. She cried out, pain shooting up her arm as he tried to drag her down. Everything flashed white inside her skull. Not again. Not again. Isaiah thrust his carbine up, hands trembling. Let her go! Boy, Colton laughed. You point that at me, and I'll gut you before you blink. Isaiah! Josiah's voice cracked like a whip. Drop that rifle. I can't, Isaiah stammered. He's touching her. Drop it. Isaiah lowered it by inches, breath breaking, fury shaking his shoulders. Colton barked a laugh. See that? King can't even control his own. Then he yanked the boy back by the collar. Enough! For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, as Colton backed his horse up, his spur caught on a stone. It snapped clean off, bright brass clattering right into Mara's lap. She stared at it, shiny, sharp, still warm from his boot. A piece of the man who had nearly taken her life hours ago. Her fingers curled around it without thinking, tight, defensive, almost reverent in its wrongness. She didn't know why she held it. Only that she couldn't let it go, Colton didn't notice. He was too busy pointing at Josiah. This ain't over, King. You walk round this town like you're forgiven. But men don't forget what you done. Bear Creek don't forget. Josiah's face stayed carved from stone. But his eyes gave him away. There was a flicker there. A storm he was trying to hide from both her and Isaiah. Colton spat in the dirt. Next time you won't walk away without giving something up. Then he wheeled his horse and rode off, his gang thundering behind him. Only when the dust settled did Mara realize she was shaking. Josiah climbed down slowly, knees bending like a man carrying 40 extra years on his back. You all right? He asked. It wasn't a gentle question. It was a scared one. She nodded, though her breath trembled. I'm fine. It was a lie. He didn't call her on it. She looked down at her lap. The broken spur gleamed wickedly in the fading light. A symbol of fear. A warning. A fragment of the night she almost lost everything. Josiah swallowed hard. Keep that close, he said. Mara blinked. Why? So you remember, he murmured. Names change. Stories twist. But objects don't lie. She didn't understand the weight in his voice. Not yet. But she tucked the spur into her pocket anyway, feeling its cold truth settle against her hip. Josiah climbed back onto the wagon and took the reins with slow, heavy hands. Isaiah rode close, jaw clenched, eyes watering with a mixture of shame and rage. As the wagon creaked forward, Mara glanced between the two men, the older one haunted by secrets, the younger one torn between proving himself and protecting others. A family stitched together by danger, by burden, by choice, but barely holding, barely. And somewhere deep inside, Mara felt the first spark of something new. Not hope, not yet, but resolve. She was done being dragged by men who thought her life was theirs to shape. If the world wanted to take something from her again, it would have to fight harder than this. Evening Star Ranch sat quiet when they returned. Too quiet. No wind. No lanterns left burning. Just the long, aching silence of a place that had seen too much trouble in one single day. Josiah King stopped the wagon near the barn and helped Mara down, but she stepped back before he could touch her arm. It wasn't rejection. Not quite. It was exhaustion wrapped in fear. Isaiah slid out of the saddle, face flushed, fists balled tight. The boy didn't speak until they were all halfway to the porch. Then he exploded. "You should have let me shoot him." Josiah didn't slow. "No." "He grabbed her," Isaiah shouted. "He grabbed her like she was. Exactly," Josiah snapped, "which is why the whole damn town would have called it self-defense for him and murder for us." Isaiah stomped forward, chest heaving. "So what? We just let 'em treat us like dirt? Let 'em touch whoever they want? Let 'em talk about Bear Creek like, enough?" Josiah's voice dropped low, warning, but Isaiah didn't back down. "You ain't the man you used to be." The porch boards groaned under Josiah's boots as he turned, eyes narrowing. "And you don't know enough about the man I used to be to say that." They stared at each other, nephew to uncle, boy to man. Mara stood a few steps away, one hand on her stomach, wishing she could disappear into the shadows. Isaiah's voice cracked. "You could have stopped them. You could have protected her." "I did protect her," Josiah growled. "How? By not fightin' back?" Josiah's jaw tightened until the muscle jumped. "By not giving them a reason to bury me." Isaiah swallowed hard. His anger didn't fade, just sagged under the weight of fear. "Feels like we're already burying ourselves." He turned and stormed into the barn, the door slamming with a hollow echo. Silence seeped in like cold air. Mara kept her gaze on the dirt, afraid her voice would fail if she spoke. But Josiah didn't move toward the house. He stood on the porch like a man rooted between two lives, one soaked in blood, one trying desperately not to drown in it. Finally, she whispered, "He's young. He's scared." "So am I," Josiah said. His voice was rough, scraped thin. "Difference is, I know what happens when a man lets fear pull the trigger." He started toward the door, then paused as if remembering she was there, bruised, shaking, trying to make herself small but failing. "You should eat something," he said quietly. "You ain't had more than a bowl of beans since last night." Mara nodded, but made no move to follow. Instead, she looked at him, really looked at him. The stiff posture, the clenched jaw, the way his eyes avoided hers. "Josiah," she said softly, "why did Colton call you that? Midnight King." A jolt traveled through him, not visible but felt, like a shift in air before lightning strikes. He rested one hand on the door frame, fingers pressing into the wood. "Old name," he murmured, "from old days." She waited, but he didn't explain, didn't offer anything, didn't even look at her. Something heavy slid through her stomach. "Josiah," she tried again. Did you know my husband's name before today?" This time his eyes flicked up, brief, sharp, almost pained. "I knew the name Ellis," he said. "Knew it from that medal on the wall years back. But I didn't know you're Jonah. Not truly." It was the truth, but not the whole truth. She felt it immediately, like touching a wall that looked solid but rang hollow when knocked. "Back in the sheriff's office," she said, stepping closer. "You went pale when you saw his name." He clenched his jaw. "Ain't nothin'." "That's not true," she whispered. His silence stretched. Too long. Too tight. Mara's breath caught. "You were at Bear Creek, weren't you?" Josiah froze. The answer sat in his stillness. Not spoken. Not denied. Just there. Her chest tightened painfully. Jonah's letters came rushing back. His fear, his confusion, the smoke, the shouting. She had never asked who he died saving. Never thought she would meet the man whose life Jonah had traded for his own. She felt suddenly sick. Josiah's voice finally broke the silence. "I knew the smell of that place. The sounds. That's all." It wasn't all. She could hear it in every word. Her hand trembled as she held the porch railing. "Why won't you just say it?" "Because saying it don't change a damn thing," he said, voice low. "It don't bring him back. Don't help you. Don't help the child you're carrying. It only hurts." "But lies hurt worse," she whispered. He shut his eyes. Not in frustration, in shame. When he opened them again, he looked older, tired in a way that didn't touch his body, only his soul. "Mara, I ran from a lot of things in my life," he said quietly. "I ain't proud of it, but some truths gotta wait until folks are strong enough to carry them." "And you think I'm not strong?" The tremble in her voice wasn't fear anymore. It was betrayal. "No," he said gently. "I think you're breaking, and I ain't here to push you off the edge." His tenderness hurt more than any confession. She stepped back from him, not far, but enough for cold air to slip between them. "Good night, Josiah." He opened his mouth, maybe to explain, maybe to apologize, but nothing came out. Mara walked into the house, leaving him alone on the porch. Josiah stayed there long after the lanterns went dark, long after the sky turned black, long after Isaiah's footsteps stopped pacing in the barn. His hand rested on the porch post. His breath fogged in the cold. And the truth he'd tried to hide, the truth Mara already felt in her bones, hung in the air like a noose waiting for a neck. He had been at Bear Creek, and he had lived because Jonah Ellis had not. Night on the frontier that could be quiet, in a way that carved into your bones. Broad, empty, endless. But that night, Evening Star Ranch didn't have silence. It had shouting. It had laughter. Mean, slurred, ugly. It had torches swinging like wild stars beyond the tree line. Mara Ellis heard them first. She'd run from the old barn with tears choking her throat, stumbling back toward the house on shaking legs. Her breath came sharp, shallow, half grief, half panic. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to get away from Josiah King before her heart collapsed under the weight of everything she'd just learned. But then she heard a voice, too loud, too close. "Light 'em up, boys! Let's pay that King Ranch a visit!" Her blood froze. Colton Briggs. Again, she spun toward the sound, hands curling over her stomach protectively. Shadows, 6, maybe 8 men, moved through the trees, torches bobbing like drunk fireflies. Boots crunched dry earth. Horses snorted. The smell of whiskey rolled ahead of them like a warning. "No," Mara breathed. "No, not tonight." But the world didn't care what she begged. Isaiah burst from the barn, breathless. "Mara! Inside! Now!" She couldn't move. Not until Josiah sprinted across the yard, grabbing her arm and pulling her behind him, voice low and fierce. "Stay behind me. Don't step outside this porch for any reason." Then he turned, alone, facing the oncoming blaze of drunken fury. Mara clung to the porch post, heart thundering. Her mind wouldn't stop replaying what she heard in the barn. "Jonah died for him. And I'm standin' on a ranch built from the life he bought." She'd barely begun to process that when the world came hunting again. The torchlight hit the front yard like a rising sun made of fire and cruelty. Colton Briggs swaggered at the head of the pack, grinning wide, a bottle swinging from his fingers. "Well, well," he crowed. "Midnight King standin' on his porch like a hero. Ain't that a sight?" Josiah didn't flinch. "Take your boys and go home." "Home?" Colton laughed. "Hell, we are home. Wild night, little whiskey, little justice. Thought we'd come collect what's ours." Isaiah stepped beside Josiah with his rifle raised. Josiah shoved the barrel down hard. "Not another word," he hissed. "Don't give 'em a reason." Colton raised his torch, pointing it toward the house. "Heard Josiah here's hidin' a woman. Heard she's an Ellis. Heard she's trouble." The crowd murmured, voices eager, restless, hungry for spectacle. Mara shrank behind the open door, shaking uncontrollably. She thought she had known humiliation. She thought she had known fear. But hearing her dead husband's name thrown around like trash by a man who had tried to buy her body broke something new inside her. Josiah stepped off the porch, jaw clenched. "You bring that torch 1 foot closer to this ranch and I'll—" Colton cut him off with a mocking drawl. "You'll what? Fight me? Kill me? Run?" He winked. "You're real good at running, King." The crowd snickered. Colton kept talking, loud enough to reach every shadowed window. "We all know how Bear Creek went. Jonah Ellis died because you ran. Folks say you still got his blood on your boots." Mara gasped. Even Isaiah flinched. Josiah's face stayed carved from stone, but Mara saw pain flicker through him, a flash of guilt sharp as broken glass. "Leave Jonah out of your mouth," Josiah said quietly. "What for?" Colton sneered. "Seems half the county's talking about him tonight. Might as well finish the tale. Midnight King here ain't just a coward. He's a coward hiding a woman who don't belong to him." He smirked. "She belongs to any man with a dollar." Mara's breath shattered. Isaiah cursed under his breath. "I swear I'm gonna—" Josiah shot him a look that stopped him cold. Colton kept pacing, waving his torch like a preacher at a revival. "Bring her out," he shouted. "Let's hear what Miss Ellis has to say, or let's burn this place down till she crawls out beggin'." A few men cheered, a few shifted nervously, a few looked at the flames like they weren't drunk enough to ignore what fire does to human skin. Josiah took one step forward. He looked so calm that it scared Mara more than Colton's rage. "You're not touching her," Josiah said. "Not on my land." Colton barked a laugh. "Your land, not for long. Briggs Bank says you're weeks behind on payment. Word is, this ranch will belong to us by fall. Might as well light it early." Mara clapped a hand over her mouth. This wasn't just harassment. This was a man who wanted everything Josiah had: land, safety, reputation, and would destroy whatever stood in the way. Colton raised his torch again. "Last chance. Bring out the girl." Inside the house, Mara trembled so hard she had to grip the door frame. If she went out there, they'd ruin her. If she stayed, they'd ruin the ranch. And Josiah, he might be killed. Her heart pounded like a trapped animal's. She could still taste the truth he hadn't said, still feel the sting of betrayal, still hate him for what Jonah sacrificed, still hurt because the man who broke her trust was the only one facing down a mob to protect her. Everything inside her was splitting open. Sheriff Duffy arrived at last, stumbling out from behind his horse with his badge crooked and his fear plain as day. All right," he called weakly. "Let's calm down, boys. Put the torches down. Let's talk this through." No one listened. Colton turned, smiling like a wolf. "Sheriff, you're late. We're just setting things straight." Duffy swallowed. "Now, Josiah ain't done nothing wrong tonight." "That ain't what folks here want," Colton hissed. "They want justice." Duffy stepped back, hands up. "Now let's just ease up." But his voice held no authority at all. He wasn't here to stop anything. He was here to witness it. Mara's vision blurred. Fear, rage, helplessness, guilt. Everything twisted together until she couldn't breathe. Her fingers dug into the frame. Her knees shook. Her stomach tightened around the child she carried. She whispered to herself, voice thin as thread, "Please, not again. Not again." Josiah didn't turn to check on her, didn't take his eyes off Colton. He stood, unarmed against a mob, a man branded by his past, one breath away from being killed in front of the only people who had ever needed him. Mara had never felt so powerless, or so close to breaking. The torches hit the yard like a wave of fire. Colton Briggs led the pack, swagger loose, whiskey dripping off every word. Evening Star Ranch glowed under the flames, and Mara Ellis stood frozen in the doorway, her breath gone, her whole body shaking. Colton pointed at Josiah with the burning tip of his torch. "Bring her out. Bring out the little Ellis widow." Mara flinched so hard she grabbed the doorframe to stay upright. Josiah stepped off the porch, shoulders squared, voice quiet but steady. "You're done here, Colton." Colton barked a laugh. "Done? Hell, we're just getting started. Folks in town been talking, whispering. Rememberin' Bear Creek." The crowd stirred like cattle before a stampede. Josiah's jaw tightened. Mara's heart hammered. Colton circled him. "Tell 'em, King. Tell 'em how a soldier boy, Jonah Ellis, caught a bullet meant for you." He leaned in, smiling viciously. "Tell 'em you ran." A few men laughed uneasily. Others went silent. Isaiah stepped forward. "Shut your mouth." Colton's grin widened. "Funny. That's what Jonah should have said at Bear Creek, wasn't it?" Josiah suddenly spoke, quiet, raw, stripped of all armor. "I ran." The yard stilled. "I ran," he repeated louder. "And a boy died because I lived." His voice cracked. "I ain't hiding that." A murmur rolled through the mob. Shock, disgust, confusion. Colton seized it. "Hear that, boys? Midnight King admits it. Jonah gave his life for a coward." Mara covered her mouth, tears burning her eyes. Colton pointed his gun at Josiah. "Now tell me, will you run again? Or will you shoot me and hang by dawn?" Josiah's hand twitched toward his holster. Isaiah panicked. "Josiah, don't!" Colton laughed. "Do it. Be the man town already thinks you are. Give me a bullet so Briggs Bank can take this ranch before sunrise." Mara suddenly understood the truth. Colton didn't want to fight. He wanted Josiah to pull the trigger. He wanted a reason to claim Evening Star. Josiah lifted his gun, slow, heavy, haunted. His eyes darkened like Bear Creek was rising out of the dirt. His finger moved toward the trigger, and Mara moved before she even knew she was moving. She burst from the doorway, breath shattering, and threw herself in front of Josiah, arms wide. "Stop!" Isaiah shouted her name. Josiah staggered, gun lowering on instinct. Colton blinked, thrown off. Mara's voice ripped out of her chest, cracked with grief. "If you shoot him, you kill Jonah twice!" Everything froze. Josiah stared at her as if she'd reached inside his ribs and broken something loose. Mara kept going, breath ragged. Jonah died saving a man who could be better, not a man who'd throw another life away to ease his guilt. Josiah's face crumpled. Colton scoffed. "Look at you, giving speeches for the man who cost your husband his life." Mara turned on him, eyes blazing. "Don't you ever say Jonah's name again?" Even the mob stepped back. Sheriff Duffy, who had been hovering uselessly at the edge, suddenly seized the moment. He lunged forward, grabbing Colton's arm. "That's enough! Colton Briggs, you're under arrest for threatening a ranch and disturb." Colton swung at him, cursing, but the mob had lost its fire. Men backed away, torches lowering, murmurs breaking through the tension. The sheriff wrestled Colton toward his horse. "Town'll hear this in the morning," he panted. "Your daddy can't buy you out of this one tonight." Colton spit in Josiah's direction. "This ain't over, King. Ain't over, Ellis." The torches retreated, one by one, into the dark. Silence crashed down. Mara's knees buckled, and Josiah caught her before she fell. She pushed weakly against his chest. Don't touch me." He let go instantly, as if her skin burned him. "Mara," his voice trembled. I wasn't gonna shoot him. You were," she whispered. "And Jonah would have died for nothing." Isaiah stepped closer, tears on his face. You saved him. You saved all of us. Mara wiped her cheeks with shaking hands, looking between the two men, the haunted man who lived and the young man who feared becoming him. Her voice was a whisper carved from exhaustion and truth. You owe Jonah more than a death, Josiah. You owe him a life worth living. Josiah dropped his gaze, shoulders sagging under the weight of her words. He wasn't broken like earlier. He was stripped bare, and for the first time he nodded, not in defeat, but in surrender. To truth, to grief, to the debt he had carried alone. Redwater Crossing gathered like a storm the next morning. Word of Colton's arrest spread faster than wildfire, and by sunup, half the town had crowded the dusty square. Storekeepers, ranch hands, widows, bankers, drunks with guilt in their eyes, and a few who just wanted spectacle. Mara Ellis stood behind Sheriff Duffy as he read out the charges. Her palms were damp, her stomach twisted. The child inside her fluttered like it could feel every heartbeat she tried to steady. Colton Briggs stood in shackles, sneering at the crowd like he still owned it. Duffy's voice cracked. Disturbin' the peace, threaten a private ranch, attempted violence. But the people didn't care about legal words. They wanted a story, a villain, a hero, and they weren't sure who was who. Someone shouted, "What about the Midnight King?" Another, "What about Bear Creek?" Another, "What about the Ellis girl?" The last one cut deepest. Mara lifted her head, just enough to see Josiah across the crowd. He stood alone, hat low, eyes shadowed. He didn't try to defend himself, didn't speak, didn't even lift his gaze. He looked ready to be condemned. She couldn't let that happen, not after the night he almost died twice, once by Colton's gun, once by his own guilt. Her hands shook as she stepped forward. "Sheriff, let me speak." A hush rolled over the square. Duffy blinked at her, stunned. "Miss Ellis, you sure?" "No," she whispered. "But I need to." He stepped aside. Mara walked into the center of the square. Every eye hit her at once. Men who had judged her bruises. Women who had whispered behind her back. Boys who looked at her like trouble. She lifted her chin. "My husband, Jonah Ellis," she began, voice thin but steady, "died at Bear Creek, and for years, folks told his story wrong." The crowd shifted. Colton snorted. "Here we go." "Quiet!" Duffy barked, surprising everyone, including himself. Mara continued louder. "Jonah didn't die as a symbol or a hero on a wall. He died scared. He died trying to protect someone who didn't think he deserved protectin'. He died hoping the man he saved would live better than the man he was that day." Her eyes found Josiah's, haunted, aching, bracing for hatred. She didn't give it to him. "Yesterday," she said, "that man almost threw his life away to pay a debt Jonah never asked for." The mob murmured, nervous, unsettled. Mara's voice gained strength. Killing Colton wouldn't honor Jonah. Running wouldn't honor him either. But living different, Protecting someone instead of saving your own pride. That's what Jonah wanted. That's what he died for. Her breath trembled. And Josiah King did that. Last night he chose restraint. He chose life. He chose to break the cycle of men who only know guns and shame. A woman near the front wiped her eyes. A ranch hand lowered his head. Someone muttered, "Damn, she's right." Mara touched her stomach. My child will carry Jonah's name, but I choose what Jonah's story becomes, and it won't be twisted by men with torches or men with grudges. Her gaze cut to Colton. And most of all, it won't be weaponized by you. Colton sputtered, furious, but the sheriff yanked him back. When Mara looked again toward Josiah, his hat brim trembled. He wasn't crying, but he was close. She finished softly. Let the dead go in peace. Judge the living by what they choose now, not what they ran from years ago. Silence. Then a single nod from an old woman, a murmur of agreement, a shift in the crowd's posture, like a tight fist finally loosening. For the first time since Bear Creek, Josiah King wasn't standing alone. The square slowly emptied, leaving only dust, echoes, and a kind of quiet that felt earned. Mara Ellis slipped away before anyone could stop her. She walked until her legs shook and her breath hitched, and somehow found herself on the steps of the tiny church at the edge of town. She sat down, hands trembling in her lap. The broken spur she'd taken from Colton's boot lay across her palm, its jagged metal catching the sun. She didn't know why she'd kept it. Fear, maybe. Proof, maybe. A reminder of how close she had come to losing everything. Again. Footsteps crunched softly behind her. She didn't turn. She knew it was Josiah. He stopped at the bottom step, hat in both hands, shoulders bowed like a man carrying a lifetime on his back. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, voice low and steady, he spoke. I remember the sound he made when he fell. Jonah. He swallowed hard. I ain't never said his name out loud before. Felt like I didn't have the right. Mara's throat tightened. Josiah lifted his gaze, eyes dark with something fragile. I've been living like I died that day too. Building this ranch, keeping to myself, trying to make something good out of something awful. He took a breath. If you want to leave this county, I'll take you. If you want me gone from Redwater, I'll go. I'll do whatever keeps you and that child safe from my past. Mara looked down at the spur, cold, cruel metal, then closed her fingers around it until it bit into her skin. When she spoke, her voice trembled but didn't break. You don't get to run from this, Josiah. Not anymore. He froze. She lifted her head, eyes wet but clear. Jonah didn't die so you could disappear into guilt. He died hoping you'd live different than the men who hurt him. And yesterday, you did. The words hung between them, gentler than forgiveness, steadier than anger. She opened her palm and placed the spur in his hand. You keep this. You don't get to forget what happened. But you don't get to die in that memory either. Josiah looked at the spur like it was a brand pressed hot against his soul. Mara, what are you asking of me? Not a marriage, not a promise you ain't ready for. She placed a hand over her belly. Just a man who stands, a man who don't run, a man my child won't fear. He blinked hard, chest tightening. I can be that. If you want us at Evening Star, Mara continued softly, then it can't just be your ranch. It can't be your name alone. My child will carry Ellis. That name stays. That story stays. She drew a steady breath. The ranch sign should too. Josiah's brows lifted. King and Ellis? It's the only way this place becomes our home, she whispered. Not a debt, not a grave, a beginning. For the first time since Bear Creek, Josiah's face broke, quietly, painfully, into something like hope. I'll carve it myself, he said. Mara exhaled shakily, the tension in her shoulders releasing like a long-held breath. She didn't step into his arms. She didn't need to. The peace settling between them was enough. She rose from the church step, meeting his eyes. We're not healed yet, she said, but we're facing the right direction. Josiah nodded, voice rough. That's all I've ever wanted. They walked back toward Evening Star Ranch side by side, two people bruised by different ghosts, choosing, at last, to stop walking alone. 1 year later, Evening Star Ranch didn't look the same, and it didn't feel the same either. What once stood as a patchwork of memories, regrets, and half-repaired fences had become something steadier, something that breathed with new purpose. The land hadn't changed, not really. The cottonwoods still lined the creek bed in a ragged silver parade. The barn still creaked in the wind like an old man muttering to himself. The smell of dust and sun-warmed hay still hung thick in the afternoons. But the air carried a quiet strength now, an invitation instead of a warning. Evening Star had become a place to stand, not a place to hide. The first sign of that change greeted every traveler who approached the gate. The old ranch sign, splintered, slanted, and ghosted with letters long since faded, had been carefully sanded, rebuilt, and raised again by hands that shook a little less than they used to. Josiah had done most of the work, though Isaiah and Mara had pitched in whenever the baby napped and the cows behaved. The new letters carved deep into the cedar announced a truth they had all learned the hard way. King and Ellis cattle, not replacing, not erasing, joining. The rising sun warmed the grain of the cedar each morning, lighting it gold, making the letters glow as if the wood itself approved of the new beginning. Beneath the sign hung a small bell, no ordinary bell, but one shaped from the broken spur Colton Briggs had lost the night he tried to burn their world to ash. Mara still remembered the sight of it half buried in the dirt, the metal warped and blackened. Some folks would have thrown it away, pretended none of it happened. But Isaiah had gathered the pieces in his weathered hands, studying them with an idea forming behind his eyes. He spent weeks in the blacksmith shop, hammering, heating, quenching, shaping, until what had once been a symbol of destruction became something else entirely. When he finished, The spur had become a bell with a clear, gentle tone, polished bright as a prayer. They hung it with a braided leather strap beneath the gate. And now, every time the wind swept down from the hills, the bell gave a soft, steady chime that carried across the yard like a blessing. Mara always paused when she heard it. This morning, Ruth Ellis King, round-cheeked, wobble-legged, and eternally curious, toddled across the porch, her small hands reaching toward the sound with delighted urgency. Mara laughed and scooped her daughter up before she tumbled headfirst down the steps. Ruth smelled like warm milk and cedar shavings, a scent that had become part of Mara's days, woven into her heartbeat. "That's your papa's bell," Mara whispered, brushing a kiss over the child's soft curls. Both of them. Ruth didn't understand the words, not yet, but she pressed her tiny palm against Mara's cheek in that earnest way babies have, as if offering comfort for an ache she couldn't name. A wagon creaked near the gate. Mara turned, her eyes narrowing slightly beneath the brim of her hat. A tired couple waited just beyond the fence line, their mule shifting nervously beneath the weight of a too-light load. The man held the reins with stiff fingers, as though exhaustion had replaced courage sometime miles back. The woman, hair tangled by travel, dress clinging to her frame, looked toward the bell with wide, unsure eyes. They weren't the first to arrive like this since the ranch changed hands, and Mara doubted they'd be the last. She walked down the path, Ruth resting easily on her hip. The man swallowed hard, tipping his hat. "Ma'am," he said, voice strained and shaky. We heard this was a place that don't ask questions." Mara studied the pair. Dusty boots, hollow cheeks, fear stitched into the way they held themselves. Folks on the run, folks with burdens too heavy to set down alone. She offered a soft, knowing smile. "That's true," she said simply. Then she shifted Ruth, who had begun sucking her thumb. "You hungry?" The woman blinked. Tears welled in her eyes so quickly it startled her. "We got nowhere else to go." "Then you're home for the night," Mara said gently. "Maybe longer if you need it." She stepped aside, waving them through the gate. "At King and Ellis, we open the door first. Stories can wait till folks are strong enough to tell 'em." Relief broke across their faces. Messy, trembling, real. The couple guided the wagon through the entrance as the spur bell chimed overhead, its sound lifting into the air like a welcome spoken in a language older than words. Up on the porch, Josiah stood watching. He leaned against a post he'd replaced himself last spring, when the winter storms finally snapped the old one clean. His hat shaded his eyes, but the morning light caught the ease in his shoulders, a kind of peace he hadn't known how to carry before. The scars of his past were still there, as visible as any old wound, but the shame was gone. Or maybe not gone, just transformed into something quieter and more useful. A reminder rather than a chain. Ruth spotted him, kicking her feet with delighted squeals. Mara climbed the steps and handed the baby to her husband. Josiah gathered his daughter with a tenderness that had taken him months to believe he deserved to give. Ruth grabbed fistfuls of his shirt and burrowed happily against his chest. The bell chimed again. Josiah glanced at the couple settling in the yard, then at Mara, then at the little girl reaching for his beard with sticky fingers. His voice dropped to something low and thoughtful. Think Jonah might have liked this place now. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. The breeze, the breath between them. Jonah's name didn't hurt the way it used to. It ached, yes, but in the way healed bones ache on cold mornings. Familiar, survivable, part of the living. Mara slid an arm around his waist, leaning, close. Then we're doing it right. Evening Star Ranch glowed in the late light. A home mended from ashes, stitched together by names that refused to vanish, carried forward by people who chose, again and again, to stand instead of run. The barns weren't perfect. The fences still needed mending. The land bore the memory of every storm it had endured. But so did the people. And when the breeze swept down the valley and lifted the spur bell once more, its clear tone rang across the ranch like a promise to every weary traveler passing by. You're safe here. You belong here. You're home. Thank you for staying with this story to its end. If it reached someplace tender in you, I would be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments, your wisdom, your memories, your own journeys.